He sat in the quiet hall of stone, listening to old voices circle like dust in a beam of pale light. The elders spoke again of the human warships, of black hulls that swallowed starlight and woke dead suns, of engines that thrummed like thunder under the skin. The tales were older than the youngest moons of their world, told in soft evenings to frighten children into obedience. The elders said a single human ship could silence a fleet, could cut the fire from a star cannon, could blind a censor. Wall as easily as a breath fogs glass. Most of the young aliens laughed when they heard it. They rolled their eyes and shared jokes about ancient fear. They called the elders sweet but lost in age. They said no species builds a ship like a god and lets it drift in legend. They said myths grow in the cracks between memory and pride told them humans were small, noisy, fragile, and gone. Yet the elders kept telling the warnings the way a lighthouse keeps turning even when the sea seems calm, and the hall kept its shape around the words, and the dust kept circling in the light. Outside, the capital's 3 pale suns slid behind copper towers and turned the whole sky into a metal river. The city hummed like a patient machine. But deep in the planet's night side, hidden arrays listened to space the way a heart listens to silence, and in that silence they began to hear a shape. It started as noise, a faint hiss like breath from a sealed door, then a pause, then another hiss, but the pattern returned the next night, and the next, and then returned faster, and then climbed like steps. The young analysts drank bitter tea and laughed again. They said it was cosmic background. They said it was a dying pulsar coughing. They said the arrays were old and moody. They said the senior observer was seeing ghosts because the elders had made him soft. Still, he asked for a second. Sweep and set the filters to different angles. They watched the screens together, the room full of the blue glow of data, and the hiss became dots that lined up like beads on a wire, and the wire twisted into a spiral, and the spiral repeated after a measured gap. The senior observer felt cold inside his bones, not fear at first, but the deep steady chill of something that matches a shape seen in a book long closed. He pulled an old file, a scanned chart from a century ago, a legend index the elders had kept, a thing that students read as entertainment, and there it was, the spiral code, the one the elders said a human warship sent before it crossed a threshold. 3 spirals for 3 jumps, 2 for 2, 1 for 1. A child's rhyme stuck to a knife. He sent the report to the council, and the council called an emergency session before the 3rd sun had finished setting. The council hall was round and tall and full of eyes. Rich robes made soft whispers when the leaders moved. Guards stood still like old statues. The young delegates came in smiling. The old ones came in quiet. The data hung in the air between them, floating as thin light, spirals turning, gaps breathing, numbers like neat brush strokes. The first speaker, a proud governor with bright jewels on his wrists, called the signals a trick of random order. He said the universe is full of murmurs that look like words until you look from the right angle. He said it is childish to dress noise in fear. A scientist who wanted a new grant called the shape interesting but not urgent. A trade minister said panic would hurt the markets and therefore the schools and therefore the children. And he smiled as if he had ended the case. Then an elder rose, slow but straight, and told the old warning again. The words too simple to be poetry and too hard to be a lullaby. He said the first time his mother told him about human warships he had laughed too. Then he held a shard of black metal in his hand, a relic found in the far debris field. It was heavy for its size, wrong heavy, dense like a falling thought. He had kept it for 60 years because sometimes the shard grew warm with no cause, warmth like a breath on a neck, and in those moments he dreamed of a shadow crossing a star. He told the council that the shard warmed again last night when the arrays found the spirals. He said this is not proof, but it is the smell of fire under a door. The young delegates rolled their eyes but leaned forward. Attention is a soft admission. A defense minister with scars along his jaw asked for a combat readiness review. The proud governor snapped that it would spook the people. The defense minister replied that the people would prefer to be spooked while alive. The hall rippled with small laughter. Someone suggested they send a probe to the signal source. The senior observer said the source is not a point. It moves like a slow comet but changes speed in a way comets do not. It moves with intent. He showed a faint curve in the data, a trail that bent like a hand choosing. The Scout Corps representative, young and angry and tired of being ignored, begged for a small fast ship to taste the edge of the path. The proud governor said there is no budget and no need. The trade minister nodded, and their nods built a wall. But walls can have doors, and fear is a key, a second elder, voice thin as old paper, asked them to remember the year the lights went out in the eastern arm. 12 stations dark in an hour, no bodies, only dust that clung to every corridor like frost. No one ever found a cause, and the elders never blamed humans in public. But deep in family rooms they whispered the word Warship. Because the dust was not a failure, it was a signature, and not many species sign with absence. Outside the hall the city lights blinked in layers. In the low market quarter workers listened to blackband radio and heard the first rumors. In the high gardens the rich tasted sweet fruit. In the quiet rooms of the skyport the flight marshals listened to engine heartbeats and felt a faint tremble they could not place. A child on a balcony pointed up and asked his parent what shape a myth makes when it is true. The parent said a myth makes the shape of your eyes when you finally see. In a long corridor a lone custodian swept and heard the echo of boots and whispered to herself the words of the elder's rhyme. 3 spirals for 3 jumps, 2 for 2, 1 for 1. In the command ring of the orbital shield a young officer checked a map and saw a thin grey arc bend toward them like a finger. Back in the council, the debate heated like metal under steady sun. Pride rose, fear coiled, logic stood small but did not sit. The scientist argued for time, more measurements, more models. He said conclusions need the weight of patience. The defense minister said warships do not wait for peer review. The proud governor spoke of panic again. He said our people are tired of crises made of shadows. The senior observer said shadows exist because something blocks the light. The scout representative said they could launch on quiet engines and come back with truth before dawn. The trade minister warned of lost ships, lost money, lost face. The elder asked which loss weighs more, the one you choose or the one that chooses you. The hall fell to a low murmur, a sound like rain behind a wall. Then the arrays sent a fresh burst, the data curtain flickered, the spirals changed, the gaps shortened, the motion curve steepened. The object was closer now by a margin that made the proud governor stop mid-sentence. The senior observer enlarged a tiny corner of the graph. There was a flash in it, not a light, more like the memory of a light, like when you close your eyes after looking at the sun. And the flash repeated at a rhythm that matched a fragment of the old index, the one the elders called the door knock. It meant a ship was about to fold from one skin of space into another nearer one. The defense minister asked the exact distance. The observer read the numbers, and the hall's air felt thinner, as if the world had climbed a mountain without moving. The elder closed his eyes and touched the shard in his pocket and felt it warm again, warmer than before, almost a pulse. They voted, finally, not on whether the myths were true but on what to do if truth came in the next breath. The plan was small and clumsy and born of compromise. 2 scout cutters would launch dark to meet the edge of the path. The shield ring would raise without sirens. The markets would remain open. The news would say nothing yet but would prepare soft language that could be hardened without breaking. The elders would be given a seat on the emergency board for the first time in a century. The proud governor accepted because refusing would taste like guilt. The trade minister swallowed because numbers alone do not calm a heartbeat. The scientist nodded because data loves more data. The defense minister exhaled because action is a kind of answer even when it is not enough. The scout cutters slid free from their sockets, skin black, lights off, engines a whisper. They curved away under the city's night, and the pilots looked into a dark so complete it seemed to drink thoughts. They talked to each other in short words and long breaths. They watched their scopes and saw the curve of motion bend yet again. They asked the ring for update. The ring sent the spirals, smaller now, closer. The pilots felt their mouths dry. One pilot remembered a story his grandmother told. About a winter when the wind sang in a pattern and the old hunters said do not go to the valley. And the young went anyway, and found the bones of a giant under the snow. He wondered what bones look like in space. In the council hall the elder began to speak softly to no one and to everyone. He told the hall that the first time a human warship came to their records it did not fire. It only sent the spirals and the door knock and then passed like night passing. And the worlds that listened lived, and the worlds that laughed paid a cost in silence. He said a warning is not always a threat. Sometimes it is the last kindness. The proud governor stared at the data and felt a small hard stone slide in his chest. He thought of his children asleep in the high rooms. He thought of the city like a patient machine. He thought of the dust on 12 stations. He did not speak. The trade minister rubbed his eyes. The scientist whispered numbers like prayers. The defense minister checked the angles of the shield and wanted them thicker. The senior observer watched the spirals and felt like a man standing on a shore seeing a wave that began on another planet. The arrays sang again, faster, brighter, like hail on metal. The door knock sharpened. The elder's shard grew hot. Alarm stayed quiet by plan but every nerve in the room rang. The scout cutters reported contact with a pressure that was not pressure. A sense of being seen by something that understood what seeing costs. The pilots described a shadow where no light fell, and in that shadow lines like thin lightning that crawled along shape. The cutters' cameras could not measure an edge. The scopes showed numbers that did not behave, and the pilots fell silent as if a great ear had bent close to hear their next word. In that long breath the council stopped being two rooms, old and young, proud and afraid, and became one small creature waiting in a great field, listening to the grass move when no wind blows. The elders' warnings were no longer a story the young could push aside. The spirals were no longer marks on a screen. They were footfalls on a stair coming down, and every life in the city, in the farms and towers and ships and quiet rooms, tilted a little toward the sound. The proud governor finally said in a voice that did not sound like his own that they would open the emergency channels to every colony in their chain. The defense minister agreed. The scientist prepared a tight beam greeting that was only numbers and respect. The elder held the shard and said softly, "If it is them, listen first, because the oldest warnings were born from someone else's mistake, and sometimes the only way to live is to let a legend finish its sentence." Outside, the sky went very still, as if the stars were holding their breath too, and in that stillness the first reply came, not in words yet, but in a deep change in the noise, a shape like a hand sliding across the surface of night, and the city that had mocked the elders felt, for the first time, the weight of a truth bigger than pride, a truth with an engine, a hull, and a history, moving closer, as gentle as a tide and as certain as dawn. The scout cutters drifted into the dark, their engines soft as whispers, their hulls painted black too. Hide in the emptiness, each pilot's heart beat too loud in the silence. They had been trained for danger but not for myths. One of them tapped the console nervously, trying to believe it was only another patrol. But the other felt the weight of the spirals pressing on him like eyes from across the void. Behind them, the council chamber buzzed with false calm. Proud leaders telling themselves this was just a probe, just noise dressed as prophecy. Yet their voices shook when they thought no one was listening. The elder sat quietly in the corner, fingers wrapped around the shard that pulsed with slow warmth. He remembered the old words, 3 spirals for 3 jumps, 2 for 2, 1 for 1. He whispered them like a prayer, though no one wanted to hear prayers in a chamber of power. Out in the cutters the stars seemed wrong. A space that should have been empty now had weight. The sensors flickered as though they touched something vast and invisible. One pilot swore he saw a shadow move against the backdrop of constellations. But when he blinked it was gone. The younger pilot tried to laugh but the sound died in his throat. Then the hiss came again, not through speakers, but through the hull itself, a low vibration that made their teeth ache. The pattern was the same as the spirals, steady, patient, impossible to mistake. The pilots looked at each other. Neither spoke, because both knew they were being answered, and the answer was older than either of them could grasp. In the council, reports arrived in jagged bursts. The cutters were sending fragmented images, grainy outlines of something too large to measure. Every scan failed. Distances broke into nonsense. One frame caught a streak of light across an impossible angle, and the chamber fell silent when it showed on the wall. Some called it a glitch. Others muttered that they had seen the same streak in ancient carvings left in the ruins of abandoned moons. A defense officer said the streak matched the mark found on the dusted stations. The proud governor slammed his fist on the table and called for calm. But his voice cracked. The elder only whispered again, "If you laugh at warnings, the universe will answer with silence. But if you listen, perhaps it will speak." The cutters drew closer to the shifting shape, and then the silence broke with a single sound. A pulse that rang through space and bent their instruments like reeds in wind. Both ships shook as if gripped by unseen hands. Alarms screamed and then died. Lights flickered and vanished. The pilots floated in the dark, their breath loud inside helmets, and through that dark came a glow, not sharp, but slow and deep, lines of light tracing across a vast hull. Enormous patterns flowing like rivers of fire. The warship had revealed itself, black metal swallowing the stars, every angle sharp but wrong, as though space itself bent to hide it until it chose to be seen. The pilots stared. One whispered that it was alive. The other whispered it was a god, and both felt smaller than they had ever felt before. Back in the city, the signal arrived, clean and clear, a transmission from the cutters before their voices cut out. The image froze on the council wall, the warship's silhouette rising behind them, vast enough to eclipse constellations. The chamber filled with gasps. Some shouted to ready weapons, Others begged to open surrender channels. Panic surged like a storm inside the circle. But the elder stood, his voice steady. He said, "This is not an enemy yet. This is a memory returned," he told them. "The warship is not here to destroy without reason. It is here to remind. And if they chose pride again, the galaxy would burn like before." The governor tried to argue, but his words fell thin, because every eye was fixed on the shape in the stars, and every heart felt the truth. The legends they mocked had walked into the present, and there was no turning away now. The warship hung in the darkness like a wound in the sky, black metal swallowing the stars, its glowing lines shifting with slow rhythm like veins under skin. The two scout cutters floated powerless before it, their engines cold, their lights stolen. Only the shallow sound of breath filled the cockpits. One pilot reached for controls out of instinct. But nothing answered, no button, no lever, no switch. The ship had become a coffin drifting in silence, and yet they felt watched, the presence pressing into their minds as if every thought were being read and weighed. Far behind them in the Homeworld Council chamber, the leaders argued in rising panic. The proud governor screamed that they must fire the orbital shields. The defense minister shouted that no weapon had ever been tested against such a thing. The scientist whispered numbers that made no sense, distances that bent like mirrors. The trade minister worried about colonies, markets, the flow of goods, his voice trembling as if such things mattered now. The elder sat unmoving, the shard in his palm hot as coal, his old eyes fixed on the frozen image of the warship. He did not argue, he only listened, because in the silence he heard something deeper than fear. He heard patience. The pilots felt it too, the sense that the warship was not rushing to strike. It was waiting, watching, measuring. One whispered into the comms, though he knew the systems were dead. He said, "We are ants before a storm." The other said, "No. We are stories waiting to be judged." Then the warship moved, not with thrusters or engines, but with a shift like space itself bent beneath it. Stars stretched and bent around its hull. The scouts felt their bodies pulled against straps as if gravity had shifted. Without warning, the cutter hulls groaned but did not break, and then the warship spoke, not with words first, but with sound, a low hum that shook bones and filled blood with vibrations. It was the same hum the elders had described, the hum that once emptied 12 stations, a sound like a heart beating in a machine too vast to see. In the council, the sound came through the arrays, no speakers, no wires. The whole chamber resonated as if the air itself became a drum. Some leaders clutched their ears, others dropped to their knees. The proud governor froze mid-breath, unable to move. The defense minister whispered that this was not attack but demonstration, a show of power without fire. The elder finally rose and said aloud, "Listen, just listen, because if they meant us dead we would already be dust." The hum deepened, then shifted, shaping into patterns, rising and falling in ways that twisted like the spirals before. The scientist's eyes widened. He began writing equations in the air. He said, "It is language, raw mathematics, simple but vast. It is a message carved in frequency." The elder nodded. He said, "It is the same message they always sent, the one that says we warned you." The pilots felt the hum crawl into their minds, not words, but images, flashes of burning fleets, stars dimming under strange weapons, worlds silent and cold, then a softer flash, of stars alive, of colonies thriving because they listened. Both pilots trembled, their hands shaking. They realized the warship was showing them choice, not threat, but memory, a mirror of what could be. One whispered through dry lips that the myths were never lies. They were warnings written as stories to keep us ready, and now the story had become real, in the council. The images bled into every display, every leader forced to watch fleets burning, stations empty, planets silent, and then visions of peace where respect held stronger than pride. The chamber broke into chaos, half screaming to surrender, half demanding to strike first. The proud governor's voice rose above them all, shaking. He said, "We cannot kneel to ghosts, we must show strength." The defense minister spat back, "That strength is knowing when your sword is straw against stone." The warship's glow brightened, long rivers of light racing across its hull like veins alive. The scouts' instruments flared and died again. One pilot whispered, "We should not even see this. We are insects staring into a star." But still he stared, unable to look away. The elder in the chamber raised the shard high, the heat burning his skin. He said, "This is no ghost. This is the echo of a truth you cannot unlearn." And the shard cracked in his hand, breaking with a sharp cry, a burst of sparks. Flying like dying stars, the room fell silent, staring at the old man clutching the broken piece. His palm blistered but his voice steady. He said, "Now you know. Now you cannot pretend to laugh. The warship has spoken. And it has not yet chosen whether to remember us as dust or as listeners." The silence after his words was heavy, as if the chamber itself held its breath, and beyond the stars the warship waited, still watching, still patient, daring them to decide who they truly were before its next move. The warship did not vanish. It lingered like a shadow carved into the stars. Its black hull stretched wider than any city, its glowing rivers of light flowing in patterns no alien mind could decode. The two scout cutters floated helpless before it, powerless but alive, their pilots breathing shallow, staring with wide eyes at the impossible ship that seemed less like metal and more like a living memory. In the council chamber, the silence after the elder's words was deep and heavy, broken only by the faint crackle of his shattered shard. The proud governor stood stiff, his pride fighting his fear. He said, "The people must not see this image. We will control the story, call it an anomaly, a trick of light." But the defense minister's voice cut through him sharp as a blade. He said, "No lie can cover the sky. When the people look up they will feel it themselves. The hum is already in their bones. The truth is too big to bury." In the markets below the copper towers, citizens already whispered. The air itself had carried the vibration. Children cried without knowing why. Animals froze and stared at the heavens. In the far farms machines stuttered for a breath and then returned. As if even the soil knew it was being watched. The governor's words rang hollow against such signs. And when he saw the faces of the other council members he felt his strength slipping. Still he shouted for order. For control, because control was all he had left. But the elder's broken shard still smoked in his palm, and the smoke wound through the chamber like fingers of ash, reminding them all that myths had become present. The pilots in the cutters tried again to send a message, their systems dead, but their minds filled with images not their own. One saw burning fleets turn to drifting husks. Another saw a peaceful council bowing under the shadow of a warship and living to see suns rise. Both felt the weight of choice pressed into their skulls like a brand. They knew they were witnesses chosen by the ship itself, not by accident, but because the warship wanted to be seen, wanted to be remembered, not as story, but as judgment. The younger pilot whispered into the silence. "If this is death, then it is slower than I feared. If it is warning, then it is louder than I can bear." Back on the homeworld, the scientists struggled with numbers that refused to stay still. The ship's mass shifted as if it was not bound by one reality. Scanners showed it both near and impossibly far, as if the warship stretched across layers of space. The defense minister ordered weapons checks. Even though he knew their shields were straw before fire, still soldiers prepared in silence. Because soldiers always prepare, while the governor demanded silence, demanded secrecy, demanded that the people never learn the truth. But his voice trembled and his hands shook, and those watching him saw the truth of his fear clearer than any words. The elder finally stepped forward, his burned palm bleeding but steady. He said, "The ship has not fired, not yet. It waits for us to listen or to mock, as our ancestors did," and their laughter became dust. He raised his voice louder than it had been in years. He said, "The choice is not whether we believe. The choice is whether we survive belief." The chamber stilled, all eyes upon him, some afraid, some angry, some already broken by the sight of the warship. Then the sound came again. The hum rising deep through the walls, a pulse that shook every tower, every farm, every ship in orbit. The warship spoke once more, not in words, not yet, but in that same rhythm of spirals, as if to remind them all that it had patience, but patience was not endless. In the cutters, the pilots gasped as their consoles flickered back to life for a moment. A single message blinking on cracked screens, not in alien script, but in clean human letters. 3 words they could both read though neither had ever studied the tongue. The message said, "We remember you." And then the screens went black again. The warship silent once more. The pilots looked at each other, neither able to speak, both knowing those words were heavier than any weapon. And in the council hall, as the hum faded, the elder whispered those same words, his voice thin but certain, and the chamber felt the weight of legends turning into truth, pressing on them like a mountain ready to fall. The warship remained, fixed in the darkness like an ancient scar that refused to fade, its vast hull blocking whole constellations, its glowing rivers of light shifting like molten fire under black glass. The 2 scout cutters drifted nearby, powerless yet unbroken, their pilots staring into the abyss that stared back. Fear had already burned through them, leaving only a hollow silence where courage and despair mixed together. One pilot whispered that they were still alive only because the warship allowed it. The other said no, not allowed, spared, and the difference between those words pressed down heavier than gravity. Behind them on the homeworld, the council chamber shook under tension, voices rose, fear twisted into anger. Some shouted that the warship must be attacked before it grew closer, others cried that attack would be suicide. The proud governor, red with rage, declared that their world could not bow to ancient myths. But his voice shook too much to be strength, and everyone knew it. Outside the chamber the people had already felt the truth. The hum of the warship had entered the soil, the towers, the blood of every living creature. Markets slowed, factories faltered, ships in orbit drifted in quiet confusion. Children pointed at the sky and cried without knowing why. Animals refused to move from the fields. The people whispered in the streets that the legends had woken, and whispers spread faster than orders. In secret rooms priests and philosophers who had laughed at the elders now prayed to the same myths they once mocked. Fear had become a second sun rising over their world, and no decree could eclipse it. In the cutters, one pilot saw his console flicker again for a heartbeat. Strange images burned into his eyes. He saw battles where alien fleets shattered like glass against human fire. He saw stations turn dark in silent seconds. He saw worlds surrender not to invasion but to the shadow of a single ship. Then he saw something softer, visions of treaties carved in stone, of colonies spared because they chose humility over pride. The warship poured memory into his mind, heavy and vast, not choice. But proof. The second pilot gripped his seat until his claws dug grooves in the armrest. He whispered that the ship was showing them both paths, one of fire, one of silence. The warship was not asking. It was reminding them of what had already happened to others. In the council the scientist trembled as he read new data. The ship's mass defied physics, one moment heavier than planets, the next light as a drifting stone. He said it existed across layers of space at once, not bound by laws known to them. The defense minister clenched his fists and said no fleet could match such power. But his tone carried awe, not defeat. The governor screamed again that they must silence the news, must keep control. But every eye in the chamber turned to him with cold clarity, because the people already knew, and lies could not cover a shadow so large it swallowed half their night sky. The elder raised his broken shard and said in a voice like iron, "The warship does not wait for our pride, it waits for our answer." Then the hum returned, deep and steady, rolling through their bones, through the soil, through the orbiting ships. The lights of the city flickered as if bowing in rhythm. The council chamber walls groaned, and every heart in the world seemed to beat to the same sound. This time the hum carried a shape. It twisted into a single word in their own tongue. A word they could not ignore, choose. The message fell heavy on their minds, stronger than fire, clearer than light. The pilots in the cutters gasped as the word burned across their dead consoles. The elder whispered it aloud, and for the first time the council was silent, every leader, every soldier, every citizen waiting, because the warship had spoken in a voice that carried no anger, only inevitability, and now the galaxy itself held its breath for their answer. The word hung in every mind like iron dropped into water. Choose. No one heard it with ears alone. It trembled through bone and blood. It lived in the walls, in the towers. In the soil beneath their feet, the council chamber sat frozen, the proud governor's mouth open but no sound coming. The defense minister's fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. The scientist staring at the glowing data that refused to obey reason. The trade minister sweating as if numbers could protect him from truth. And the elder still standing with his burned palm open, whispering the word again, choose. The weight of it pressed on them all, heavier than armies, heavier than fleets. Outside the chamber the people felt it too. Mothers held children close without knowing why. Workers froze in factories. Pilots on orbital stations stared at silent controls. Even the wind seemed to pause, as though the whole world waited for an answer. The scout cutters drifted nearer to the warship's impossible bulk, powerless yet carried by a pull not quite gravity. Both pilots stared through wide eyes at the titanic shape. They had stopped trying to explain. There were no words left. One pilot whispered that they were ants asked to speak to a mountain. The other said no, we are witnesses, and witnesses must tell what they saw. But both knew that even if they lived, no language could capture the size of what hung before them. The warship shifted again, its rivers of light flowing in patterns that seemed to write across the stars. Symbols too old, too sharp, too human. The pilots felt them burn into their minds though they had never studied the human tongue. Every mark carried weight like thunder, and yet the warship stayed silent after the one word, choose, as though giving them time to decide if they even had the right to reply. In the council, chaos rose again. One delegate cried that they must strike before it grew closer. Another shouted that striking would invite doom. A third demanded that they beg for peace. A fourth said to hide and hope. Voices clashed, echoing off stone walls until it was no longer debate but panic. The proud governor tried to shout over them, his voice raw, saying they would never bow, never surrender to myth, but his words cracked. His pride sounded like fear wearing armor. The defense minister slammed his hand against the table, his deep voice cutting through. He said, "Listen, you fools, if they wished to kill us we would already be shadows. This is not mercy. It is warning, and warnings are a gift." The room hushed for a heartbeat. The elder raised his eyes and said softly, "Warnings are the last kindness before fire." The people outside felt the same truth. In the markets whispers grew into shouts. In the farms families gathered around radios that carried no sound but still hummed. In the towers priests prayed in silence. In the spaceports crews refused to launch. The sky itself looked different, as if the warship's shape had changed the stars forever. Fear was no longer rumor, it was reality. Children asked their parents what choose meant, and no parent found words to answer. Some said it meant survive. Some said it meant surrender. Some said it meant fight. But deep down all knew the word meant judgment. The scout cutters received one last flicker on their screens, another line in human script. For words this time, your pride, your fate. Then the consoles died again. The pilots shivered. One said pride built this council. The other whispered pride will burn it too. They watched as the warship shifted slightly, not advancing, not retreating, simply waiting, like a teacher watching a student wrestle with truth. The silence stretched until even breath felt loud, and still the warship waited. In the chamber the scientist finally spoke, his voice unsteady but clear. He said the word choose does not mean destruction. It means decision. They have shown us both endings, one of dust, one of survival. The choice is ours. The governor snapped back that no alien should decide their fate for them. The defense minister shouted louder that refusing to choose is still a choice. The worst one. The elder stepped forward, his broken shard falling from his hand to the floor with a small sharp sound. He said, "You cannot hide from this. You cannot silence this. The sky itself carries the voice. Every soul has heard it. Now the council must answer, or the warship will answer for us." The silence that followed was the heaviest yet. The leaders looked at each other, fear plain in every face, no pride left strong enough to mask it. The hum faded into stillness. But in that stillness everyone knew the warship still waited, patient but not endless, its judgment hanging like a blade above their world. And the word echoed again in every heart, choose, louder now in memory than in sound, until the council chamber seemed to tremble with it. And the people in the streets whispered it. And the pilots in the cutters mouthed it. And the elder closed his eyes and said it once more, not as warning but as truth, choose. And the stars themselves seemed to lean closer, listening for the answer. The word would not fade, choose. It clung to every ear, every mind, every breath across the planet. As though the warship had carved it into the air itself. The council chamber sat in heavy silence, no one daring to speak. But outside their walls the word had already spread like fire. It traveled through rumor faster than any broadcast. In the markets people whispered it with wide eyes. In the farms workers repeated it in fear. In the towers children asked what it meant, and no one had an answer. In the orbital docks pilots muttered the word to themselves, gripping controls with shaking hands. And across the colonies linked by thin radio beams the same word arrived like a storm. Choose. No one had sent the message, no wire carried it. Yet every world in their chain heard it. As though the warship itself had become the voice of space. The news spread beyond their reach. Ships passing near heard the hum and carried the story further. Traders whispered in distant ports that the humans had returned. That a warship of myth had risen from legend. Fear leapt like lightning from system to system. Some laughed, calling it madness. But their laughter was thin, others prepared fleets, lining their skies with ships that already felt like paper against flame. In the council chamber the leaders argued again, their voices cracking with desperation. The governor demanded silence, demanded lies, demanded that they deny the truth. But the defense minister stood tall and said truth cannot be silenced when it lives in the stars. The scientist begged for patience, begged for study. But the elder spoke last, his voice like stone. He said this is no longer about study. It is about survival, and survival waits for no hesitation. In the cutters the two pilots floated in silence, watching the warship's massive hull shift again. Slow, deliberate, a continent moving against the black, glowing veins flaring brighter with each pulse. They felt the heat through their shields though space was cold. One pilot whispered that the ship was alive. Not just a machine but something more. The other said it is not alive as we know life. It is alive as mountains are alive, as storms are alive. And neither of them could look away, then. Their consoles blinked again for a breath, showing another human phrase, "We watch the galaxy," and the words filled them with a weight heavier than planets. Because it meant this was not just for their world. The warship's message was for all. Across the galaxy the hum reached further. Stations at the edges of space reported strange signals. Fleets patrolling empty borders turned their scanners toward the dark. And everywhere the old stories returned. The myths of human fleets that rose from nowhere, of black ships that could silence suns. Stories that had become jokes now spoke with new voices. Fear dug deep into every heart. Some leaders prepared to kneel before shadows, others sharpened their pride like swords. But all of them felt the same truth pressing on them. The humans had never been gone, only waiting, and the warship was proof. Back on the homeworld the people filled the streets, shouting at the skies, demanding answers from the council, demanding truth after lifetimes of silence. Soldiers stood uneasy in the squares, their weapons feeling small, priests shouted warnings, merchants closed stalls, families huddled together in fear, and still the hum lingered like a heartbeat. The council chamber shook with the sound of the crowd outside. The governor roared to silence them, but his voice drowned beneath the storm of voices. The elder lifted his broken shard high once more and said softly but clearly, "The galaxy already knows. The warship has spoken to all. Our pride cannot cage this truth." The council fell silent, every leader forced to see the futility of denial. Then the warship moved again, closer now, slow but unstoppable, its bulk filling the cutter's view, blocking out whole starfields until only its vast glowing lines remained. The pilots shook with terror but could not look away. The words still echoed in their minds, "Choose," and now it was not just their world choosing. It was the galaxy itself, every colony, every fleet, every proud race that had mocked the legends, all of them forced to face the truth. The myths had been real all along, and now, the choice would shape whether they lived under shadow or were burned into dust. The warship drifted closer until its black hull swallowed the sky, its glowing rivers of light no longer faint lines but blazing veins across a body too vast to measure. The two scout cutters hung powerless before it, their pilots trembling as the pressure built, not from weapons, not from engines, but from the sheer weight of presence. The silence cracked at last, and the warship spoke, not through radio, not through comms, but through the air, the ground, the marrow of bone, a deep voice that carried into every chamber, every street, every orbiting ship. It said only 3 words, "We warned you," and the sound was like stone breaking, like thunder that rolled forever. On the homeworld, the council chamber froze, the governor's lips moved but no words came. The defense minister stood rigid, his face pale. The scientist collapsed into his chair whispering numbers that no longer mattered. The trade minister held his head in his hands as if trying to block out the sound. But the elder stood tall despite the blood on his burned palm. He raised his voice against the storm and repeated the words aloud, "We warned you." And in the silence that followed his echo, the whole chamber shuddered, because the message was not threat alone. It was reminder that warnings had been given, ignored, mocked, and now the shadow of those mistakes hung above them. The people in the streets heard the same words, every child, every elder, every worker, every soldier. They clutched each other. Some dropped to their knees, some screamed, some prayed, and some stood in stunned silence. No one could pretend anymore. No one could laugh at stories. The voice had reached into their homes and left no doubt. It was real. The myths were real. The humans were real. The warship was truth. Above the cities the orbital stations shook, their crews weeping or staring in frozen terror. Ships tried to flee but their engines failed, caught in the warship's silent grip. All they could do was drift like leaves before a storm. The scout pilots felt the voice clearest of all. It pressed into their skulls like a brand. The words burned with images, flashes of shattered fleets, flames rolling through stations, stars blinking out one by one, then flashes of peace, worlds spared, colonies thriving because they listened, the choice clear, pride or survival. One whispered through dry lips that this was judgment, not attack. The other whispered that judgment is heavier than any weapon. And both sat in silence, unable to breathe under the weight of it. In the council, panic surged. Some delegates cried for surrender, others screamed to fight. The governor slammed his fists on the table, shouting that they must not kneel. But his voice cracked and died. The defense minister roared that refusal was already kneeling before pride. The scientist begged them to listen before it was too late, and the elder's voice cut through all of them, calm but sharp as steel. He said they are not asking for war, they are asking for truth. The truth we buried, the truth we mocked, the truth that now stands over us like night. He raised his eyes toward the ceiling as if looking straight at the warship and said, "We hear you." The warship pulsed in reply, its glowing rivers flaring brighter. The sound rolled again, deeper now, endless. The voice spoke once more, "We remember." The words struck harder than any cannon. They did not speak of present alone. They spoke of history, of debts unpaid, of scars unhealed, of warnings ignored, and the weight of them crushed the chamber into silence. The governors, the ministers, the soldiers, the elders, all sat frozen, unable to answer, because every soul knew what those words meant. The humans had never forgotten, and now no one else would either.